Welcome back, friends. Another week of tournaments are done and in the books, and I got all the data here for you. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Before we get started, we'll do the old YouTube pleasantries. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps push it out there for more people to see. If you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you get all my latest videos. And if you're looking for any other ways to help support the channel, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/warpfriends. Link is in the description below. All right, guys, let's get started. So first up is the player numbers for the previous week. So last week we had 766 players, and for the Dataslate we're sitting at 7,387. Number of games played was 4,074, and for the Dataslate we're sitting at just over 38,500, and we had 16 tournaments last week, bringing the Dataslate total up to 146. First shot we're going to look at is the win percentage by armies for the previous week. Just a quick reminder that Games Workshop acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%, so anything within that range will be in green, anything 5% above or below will be in orange, anything above that or below that will be in red. Alright, coming in first place last week was Death Guard with a 58.4% win rate. Then we had Imperial Knights at number 2 at 56.2, Black Templars at number 3 at 55.8, Drukhari at number 4, along with Space Wolves at 50.4%. And then down at the bottom we had Tau at 38.3, Agents at 40, Gene Stealer Cults at 40.6, Adeptus Custodes at 41.1, and Deathwatch at 41.2. These arrows here just show the changes for each army versus the previous week, so you can get an idea how they're performing week over week. All right, so Death Guard's back on top this week with a 58.4% win rate. So, after dropping down a little bit, when I say a little bit, they're still above 50%. They're back on top, and Imperial Knights are right behind them at 56.2. Black Templars, surprisingly, 55.8. They had a really good week. Their new codex is coming up, so maybe they can carry some of this momentum forward into that new release. And then after that, it kind of has a massive drop down to about 50%, so we lose about 5% win rate between third and fourth place. So this week was definitely a lot more in the top 3 armies doing a lot of work, and then everyone else is either at the average or well below. So down at the bottom there, we have 9 armies below 45% win rate for the week, so that's not a good sign. It seems to be getting worse as this data slate continues on week over week. We're getting more and more armies falling below that threshold, and we're getting more and more armies each week above the 55% threshold. So and that's not what you want to see. You want to see more in the green, and it's getting more and more orange, which overall means we're in a very unbalanced state right now, and that's not surprising to anyone who's been following along at all. So Tau find themselves at the bottom this week, 38%. They've kind of been up and down all over the place, but this was not their week. Orks continue to struggle. It's under 43%. And same as Emperor's Children, after a really good start to the Codex, they kind of dropped off quite a bit. They're just down below 45%. They've been having a few rough weeks overall, so we'll see if they can bounce back after some changes are made in the next data slate. And, Death Guard, Imperial Knights, and Chaos Knights sort of get nerfed down a little bit, and maybe they have a little bit of a resurgence. But for right now, they're lumped into the bottom tier of armies there. Space Wolves maintain a pretty good win rate with the new Codex so far, 50%. Nothing wrong with that. Is exactly where we want to be. Overall this week, it was pretty evident that Death Guard and Imperial Knights sort of ran the show. Black Templars had a really good win rate, but they have a very low representation we'll get into in the next slide. So, overall, but they weren't having nearly as big of an impact as Death Guard and Imperial Knights, who make up over 15% of the meta just on their own. So those two armies getting all those wins are really skewing everyone else down. So it's not a surprising result. It's come to kind of be what we expect to see, and I don't think it's going to change much until the next data slate. Moving on to the army representation. So this is the percentage of players who play each army. If everyone played every army equally, we'd be at about 3.6, 3.7% for each army, so you can get an idea of how many people are playing each army this way. So at the top there, we had Death Guard at 10.2%, Chaos Knights at 7.2%, Imperial Knights at 6.1%, Aeldari at 5.5%, and then we had Custodes at 4.7%, and down the bottom we have Agents at 0.1%, Deathwatch at 0.4%, Grey Knights at 1%, Adeptus Mechanicus at 1.2%, and then Black Templars at 1.3%. Somehow, Death Guard made it over 10% representation this week. We've only seen that a couple times since I think I've been making videos. Not surprising at all, given their extremely good results and winning tons of tournaments. As time goes on, more and more people keep flooding to the faction. Chaos Knights and Imperial Knights maintaining their second and third spot there. They kind of flip-flop each week, but it's usually one of those two. So between those top 3 armies there, it's over 25% of all players are playing 3 armies, and that's a massive problem right now. We have a bunch of armies above the average representation there. Anywhere from basically Dark Angels and up is above representation. Anywhere below that, like once you get down past Chaos Space Marines, it plummets down really hard. So these charts always look like this. There's always, the top armies who are really good or are really popular always have a bunch of players, but it's getting to the point where everyone is flocking to this army because it's just so good. Like Death Guard, Chaos Knights, Imperial Knights are just so good right now that everyone is dropping everything they're playing basically to play them. But having that high representation across 3 different armies, over 25% of the meta, it's just going to create a lot of staleness in the tournament scene right now, and there's going to be a lot of people who are probably sick and tired of playing those 3 armies. But if you're out there to win, these armies get the results, and the tournament wins statistics are proving it, so they're going to keep getting those players until some changes are made. In the middle there, you still have a lot of armies who, even though they're doing really poorly, are still pulling in quite a few players. Tau's at 3.7%. They have been up and down. They've had some good weeks, but they've also had some really bad weeks. Votan has been right around the average, but they're sitting at 4%. They're actually above the meta average, which is nice to see for Votan. Maybe those new releases they showed have sort of sparked some interest, and people are dusting off the army to sort of get used to them again and get ready for the new release. Custodies are always very popular armies, 4.7%, and they're another army who's been struggling quite a bit this data slate, but they keep pulling the people in. And then you have down at the bottom there some armies that are kind of surprising. Chaos Space Marines are usually a little bit more popular than they are, but they've kind of fallen off over the last couple data slates. They're not getting terrible results, but they're not getting great results like they were, so not surprising to see them down a little bit. Orks is one of those armies who usually up around 3 to 4 to 5% representation, even when they're bad, but right now it's at 2.2 because they're really bad. So that's an army that I think we'll see a big bounce back next data slate once some changes are made, if some changes are made, I should say, and bring them back up to at least the average, because they're a very popular army either way, and if they're just semi-relevant, then the players will come back to them. Overall, it's what you come to expect. It looks the same every week. This week's actually a little bit worse than usual, but it ain't going to change until some of the rules or points changes. All right, next up we have the combined stats for the previous week. So this is Army win rates, XOX1 percentage, and representation. So just a quick reminder, XOX1 percentage is the percentage of players who went 5-0 or 4-1 at a tournament. It's not a perfect stat, but it's a good way to compare it to their win rate to see how well the army is performing. The higher the XOX1, the more chances to be at the top tables and better chance to win tournaments. Where the lower the percentage, the less chance you're making it to those top tables, and overall less chance you're going to have to win tournaments. So coming in number 1, we had Death Guard. Number 2, we have Imperial Knights. 3 is Black Templars. 4 is Drukhari, and then 5 we have Chaos Space Marines. Down at the bottom there, we have Imperial Agents, Death Watch, Grey Knights, Tau, and Emperor's Children. So Death Guard and Imperial Knights continue their domination. I know Black Templars and Drukhari had really good weeks, but it just pales in comparison to what those two are doing between the massive representation and the massive win percentage and XOX1 percentage. They're just dominating everything, and even Death Guard is, quite a bit ahead of Imperial Knights all on their own. Black Templars and Drukhari both did have really good weeks. They kind of got there in different ways, but Templars had a little bit better win rate, but they had about the same XOX1 percentage, and then Drukhari's got a little bit better representation. So Chaos Space Marines, one of those armies that I said, it hasn't been doing great, it hasn't been doing terrible. So they had a 47.4% win rate. They had 2.3% army representation, but they actually had a really good XOX1 percentage of 22%, like third highest for the week. So they had a good percentage of players who did really well, but everyone else probably struggled pretty hard, because if you have that high of an XOX1, it should raise your win percentage up a little bit more. If you look at the other armies who were in the 20% there, Death Guard Knights and Black Templars, they had all over 55% win rate. So you would expect Chaos Space Marines win percentage to be a little bit higher, but it's kind of a symptom of a few people doing really well and everyone else kind of struggling. A bunch of armies in the middle there who are perfectly balanced. You have anywhere from a 46 to a 50% win rate, and anywhere from like a 12 to a 17%, 19% XOX1. That's kind of all within like one standard deviation of the average, which is around 15%. So there's nothing really to mention there. Space Wolves is a little bit surprising, 50% win rate, but they only had an 8% XOX1. So not many people did very well with Space Wolves, getting to those like top tables and going 5-0 or 4-1. But had a bunch of players go 3-2, 2-3, whatever, and just sort of maintain that really perfect 50% win rate. So Space Wolves didn't have super good results last week, but they had very average results, which I guess is not bad in its own, but you would like to see that XOX1 a little bit higher. And then down at the bottom there, just to note, we had 4 armies with 0% XOX1, and most of them are very low representation. Imperial Agents had like 1 player, Death Watch had like 3 or 4 players. And then the only one that's really kind of note is Emperor's Children. They had 2.2% representation and a 0% XOX1. So there's an army there that, despite having a decent amount of players, struggled mightily, and kind of shows with their win percentage as well, down below 45%. So they had a pretty rough week there. And Tau barely escaped it with a 3.6% XOX1, and they had almost exactly the meta average for representation. So that's another army there that just, despite the large number of players, didn't really see any success across any of the players. This chart looks like every other chart, very top heavy, and it's going to keep looking that way. I say that every week, but it is what it is, and we just hope and pray that there's some changes coming in the next Dataslate. All right, moving on. It's the tournament wins for each army last week. So coming in number 1 was Death Guard, and they had 4. Chaos Knights had 2. Aeldari had 2. And then with 1 win each, we have Thousand Sons, Tau, Orks, Necrons, Demons, Blood Angels, Asher Mortarion, and Custodes. So based on the results we just saw, it's not surprising to see Death Guard got 4 wins. Chaos Knights have been picking up quite a few wins as well lately, and so is Aeldari, so they both got 2. Again, usual suspects up there. Some of the armies a little bit surprising there. Orks and Tau, they had really rough weeks, but one player from each army did manage to pull out a win. So despite Tau's really low XOX1 percentage, one of those players who managed to do well ended up winning a tournament, and the same goes for Orks. Next up is the tournament wins for each sub-faction last week, so we can just kind of break down and see how each army is getting their wins. So for Death Guard, Mortarion's Hammer picked up 2 of their wins, Virulent Vectorium picked up 1, and then the Deathlord's Chosen picked up another. For Tau, we see them pop up every once in a while, but Crude Hunting Pack picked up a win. Thousand Sons, Grand Coven. For Necrons, we had Awakened Dynasty. Aeldari had Aspect Host and then War Host. And then for Demons, we had Demonic Incursion. And one of the things that kind of makes Death Guard so potent right now is it's not just one detachment doing all the work. Most weeks when we see them get wins, it is split between 3 to 4 different detachments. So this week was no exception. And it's kind of the reason why they're so potent, because you can play so many different options and still get really good results. Each army usually just has 1 detachment that's a problem that needs some adjusting, but Death Guard's rolling around with like 3 to 4 detachments that are causing problems everywhere. All right, next up is the win percentage by armies for the current data slate. So just another quick reminder, Games Workshop acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%, so anything within that range will be in the green. For the current data slate, Imperial Knights are still number 1 at 56.5%, Death Guards are number 2 at 54.7%, Chaos Knights at 53.6%, Genestealer Cults at 52.5%, and Thousand Sons at 52.2%. And then down at the bottom there, we have Agents at 29.3%, Orks at 43.1%, Grey Knights at 43.6%, Space Marines at 43.7%, and Deathwatch at 44.6%. Imperial Knights maintaining their lead at 56.5% win rate, but Death Guard are actually getting pretty close to bumping over the 55%. They get one more good week like they did this week, and they'll be up over 55%, kind of catching up to Knights a little bit. Chaos Knights fell off just a tiny bit. I don't think they're going to quite get up that high unless they get a couple of really good weeks of results, but their win percentage has slowed down a little bit. They're not quite as high as it used to be. Down at the bottom there, we're like one bad week away from 3 armies falling below that 45% threshold there. Emperor's Children, Tau, and Dark Angels, just barely above 45%. And, you know, if those armies drop down, it's going to look really bad for this current data slate to have like 6 or 7 armies below the acceptable win rate that Games Workshop like wants to sort of aim for. And that'll be one of the worst ones we've seen in a long time. Even right now, it's still one of the more imbalanced ones we've seen in months and months. So if any more of those armies fall down there, it's going to just keep looking worse and worse. There is a good portion of armies up around the middle, which is what you would expect. You know, some of the armies who have been struggling in the past, like Sisters and Drukhari, are both kind of living up around 50%, so that is good to see. And then Space Wolves with their new codex, they're kind of creeping up each week. They're up to 48%, and they have been struggling for quite a while too, getting a little stale with the old index. Hopefully, Grey Knights might get some love here with the new codex dropping. I know people aren't too hyped about it from what I'm seeing, but it has to be better than what they're running now. And Black Templars is already in an okay spot, just sitting under 47%. If they can get even 1% more, that'll bump them up really close to the average, and they'll be in a pretty good spot as well. Overall, the chart is looking pretty imbalanced, and it's, you know, teetering on the edge of looking really imbalanced. And it could be one of the worst we've seen, like I said, in a long time, maybe since I've been doing these videos. Games Workshop will have the work cut out for them next data slate to make sure they balance a lot of armies. They got a lot of work at the top and a lot of work at the bottom to do. Next up is the army representation for the current data slate. So this is the last 8 weeks of data for the army representation. It's a quick reminder, the average representation is about 3.7%, so you can get a good idea of how many players are playing each army week over week. So coming in number 1, Death Guard at 9%, Imperial Knights at 6.3%, Tyranids at 5.5%, Space Marines at 5.1%, and then Chaos Knights at 5.1% as well. And then down the bottom, we have Agents at 0.1, Black Templars at 0.9, Deathwatch at 0.9, AdMech at 1.4, and then Grey Knights at 1.6. You know, I'm not going to spend too much time in this chart because it is kind of maintain this exact same look every week. Sometimes week over week, different armies will go up or down, but generally speaking, it's kind of just look the same this whole data slate. Death Guard is killing it, and they actually just keep going up week every week lately, it seems, which is kind of crazy to think. Normally, Imperial Knights would be at the top of the chart. I said this before, but at the end of a data slate, usually the army with the most players is like 6 to 7%, and now they're in second place, and they're in second place by a lot. And you have all the popular armies up there who are just going to always be popular: Tyrian, Space Marines, Necrons, Blood Angels, Aeldari. Then you have these armies who are performing really well, like Chaos Knights, Imperial Knights, and Death Guard. Then now at the bottom, we have a lot of armies who are in need of a codex, and hopefully will help a little bit. You have Black Templars, Grey Knights, you've got Drukhari. Space Wolves just got their codex, so they're slowly kind of creeping up. And Votan, even though they do have a 2.7% rep, they don't have their codex yet. So once that drops all the new models, we should see that bump up quite a bit as well. Orks have been slowly declining. This might be the lowest we've seen them for like a data slate in a long time. They're usually a very popular army, but they're just borderline unplayable unless you play one specific thing right now, and I think people are getting a little bored of it. So hopefully something can be done and can get those Ork players back, because they're usually quite a large portion of the representation here. All right, next up is the combined stats for the current data slate. So we have Army win rates, XOX1 percentage, representation. Just a quick reminder, XOX1 percentage is the percentage of players who go undefeated or only one loss, so 5-0 or 4-1 in a tournament. Like I said before, it's not a perfect stat, but it's just a good way to compare to the win percentage to see how an army is doing. The higher the XOX1, the greater chance you're going to be at those top tables and a chance to win a tournament. And the lower the percentage, the less chance you're going to have. So you can get an idea of how well an army is doing compared to their win percentage. So coming in number 1, we have Imperial Knights, and then we have Death Guard, Thousand Sons, Chaos Knights, and Sisters of Battle. And then down at the bottom, we have Agents, Grey Knights, Black Templars, Orks, and then AdMech. So for the data slate, Imperial Knights and Death Guard are kind of tied for first place. Imperial Knights are getting slightly better results overall, but Death Guard's representation is kind of propping them up a little bit to catch up. But both those armies are light years ahead of even the third place Thousand Sons, who are getting very good results on their own, who would normally be at the top of the charts in previous data slates. Grey Knights and Black Templars are getting their new codex soon, and those are some armies who are definitely struggling. They're second last and third last from the bottom there. Sub 10% XOX1, sub 2% representation. They're just kind of struggling all over the place. So definitely the codex is a welcome change for them. Orks is another one, and AdMech, who have been having some pretty rough results sitting down at the bottom there. We do have a lot of armies in the middle, sitting anywhere from like 46 to 48, 49%, and like a 12 to 16% XOX1, which is right around the average. And there's a good chunk of them there, but those ones at the top are way too high, and the ones at the bottom are way too low. And I know I keep saying this, but if you can skim off the top and sort of add those percentages to the armies who are struggling, and you give them some proper adjustments and some proper buffs, then we can be in a lot healthier of a place. But right now, it is looking pretty rough for those armies at the bottom. All right, next up is the Army Tournament wins for the current data slate. So this is the last 8 weeks of results here, and they are color-coded week over week, so you can get an idea of when each army is getting their wins. So coming in number 1, we have Death Guard with 28 tournament wins. We have Imperial Knights with 13, and then we have Chaos Knights and Aeldari with 12, and World Eaters with 10. And then down at the bottom there, we still have Agents and Space Wolves without a win each. So Death Guard is now doubling up on Imperial Knights after getting 4 wins this week. Well, they got 0. They're actually over double the second place army, which is something we haven't seen in a while. It was looking kind of this way early last data slate when Mortarion was really busted, but they made that like mid data slate patch to nerf them into the ground, and other armies were able to sort of catch up and close that gap. But there was no changes made for Death Guard this data slate, and they just keep gaining and gaining their lead. Now with Games Workshop's track record, they tend to nerf hard and fix later, and it could get pretty rough for Death Guard coming up. So I guess maybe enjoy it while you can, because based on what they've done to other armies who were doing really, really well, it took them several data slates to recover. So hopefully Games Workshop will have a little bit more of a subtle hand and bring them down into the middle without just destroying them. All right, and the first faction focus for the week is going to be Death Guard. They're kind of running the show here, so I thought it'd be, it's a good time. We haven't checked in on them in a while just to see how they're doing. If you look at their week-over-week results here, you can see their army representation hasn't dipped below like 7.8% over the last 8 weeks, which is a crazy high number. They've just been maintaining a massive player base and actually gaining some, it even seems. And their win percentage hasn't dropped below 53%. So even at their worst, they're still what most armies would die for right now. When you look at their stats versus the meta average here, win percentage is 54.7 versus 48.8. Their army representation is 9 versus 3.6. Their XOX1 is 23 versus 16, and their tournament wins are 28 versus 5. So they are well above the meta average in all categories. Looking down at the subfaction player count, you can see the Virulent Vectorium has the highest player percentage at 45.6%, but you do have a pretty good representation of players there for the Mortarion's Hammer at 28.8, and then Champions of Contagion at 17.3. So it's kind of like what I mentioned before, where, a lot of times when armies are kind of busted or doing really well, it's one detachment kind of carrying the load. And while Virulent Vectorium is getting most of the players, there are still 2 detachments pulling in a pretty good percentage of the player base. And then if you look down at the subfaction win percentage, you can see Mortarion's Hammer has a 57.2%. You've got the Deathlord's Chosen at 53, Champions of Contagion at 56.6. You have Virulent Vectorium at 52.4. So as I was mentioning before, like usually when armies are doing really well, there's usually one detachment that's causing a lot of the problems. With Death Guard, that's not the case. There's like 3 or 4 detachments all sitting over 55% win rate, which is crazy to think that there's that many options and they're all that good. That might be more tied to units cost or units abilities more than specific detachment rules. So I think besides maybe some nerfs to some of the rules, we're definitely going to see a lot of points hikes to sort of make up for that. I don't know if they'll do any actual data sheet changes besides maybe a couple tweaks here and there, but they're definitely going to see some massive point hikes. You look down at the bottom there, there's subfaction tournament wins. They're getting a lot of tournament wins across all subfactions, like I mentioned. Mortarion's Hammer has 10, then you got Virulent Vectorium with 8, Champions of Contagion with 4, Deathlord Chosen with 2. So it is being spread out kind of evenly, even though they're winning so many tournaments. It's being spread across 4 different detachments, which is not usual. Usually it's just one detachment winning almost all of them. So this is definitely probably the most busted army we've seen this edition for this long. Usually they kind of get knocked down before they have managed to sort of get like 8 to 10 weeks of consistent, insane results. Games Workshop usually steps in and makes some changes. Kind of did that with Orks a couple times when they had their Mega Knob problem, and with Mordaka, and they've done it over the times before when like something is really broken. They've kind of stepped in, and no other army has really maintained this high for this long with dominating across all categories. So let me know what you guys think needs to be changed for Death Guard. Is it just simple increasing the points? Is it a specific detachment rules or army rules? Is it specific datasheet rules that need to be changed? I know there's certain units that are kind of more represented than others, and we're more likely to see them, like Plague Burst Crawlers and stuff, take some hits here. But curious to see what you guys think, and let me know in the comments. Now we're going to move on to one of the other green armies, the Orks, and this is kind of the other end of the spectrum. So looking at the last 8 weeks of results there, their army representation has dropped down to around 3 to just under 3% consistently, and they're an army that normally lives around like 4 to 5%, and their win percentage, they've only had 2 weeks of over 45% win rate over the last 8 weeks, which is just abysmal. And then if you translate that to their army stats versus the meta average, their win rate is 43.1 versus 48.8. Armor representation is 3 versus 3.6. XOX1 is 10 versus 16.3, and their tournament wins are 3 versus 5.4. So all of their stats versus meta average are well below the average. The only one that's kind of an exception there is army representation, which is pretty close. And they have won 3 tournaments, which is surprising given their results, but there is a lot of diehard Orc players out there who still know how to sort of squeeze blood from a stone, so to speak, and pull out some wins here and there. Overall, they're just performing well under the average. Looking at their subfaction player counts down there, clearly people are just gravitating towards one detachment. That one's War Horde, 50% of the player base, and no other detachment except for Dread Mob is over 13%, which is weird to see because Dread Mob is usually one of the lower ones. And then the win percentages kind of mirror all that. War Horde, 42% win rate. That's kind of what you expect. You have some more of the niche armies down there, Cult of Speed at almost 50% win rate, but their representation is almost non-existent. There's only been a couple players. Dread Mob's below 45%. Green Tide's below 45%. Pretty much everything is below 45% except for Tactical Brigade, which is sitting around 58%, but it only has 7% of the player base. So just a couple players there who did well kind of for 1 or 2 tournaments might have spiked the numbers up there. I mean, overall, Orks is in a pretty rough spot. They've just been gutted a couple times over this edition when they were performing really well. So they definitely need some buffs and a little bit of a change. Any Orc players out there, let me know what you think should be changed. Is it points? Is it rules? Detachment abilities? So let me know what you think should be changed and what you think needs to be done to sort of help Orks get back up to right around the average where they should be. And that is it for this week, guys. Thanks for watching. Big shout out to my Patreon members, Meet the Great, John Verman, William Viz, and Darby Conrad, and to my YouTube channel members, Andrew Stone. Appreciate you guys. If you want to join any of these guys, you can visit my Patreon, patreon.com/warpfriends. Link is in the description below, or you can click on that membership button on YouTube. Good luck in the tournaments coming up this weekend, guys, and I'll see you next week.